Thank you to everyone here for being a part of this live virtual event and to those viewing this recording. As always, it's great to see many new faces and familiar faces joining us. Our community is growing, and I'm thankful for all of you being here time and time again and for sharing these programs with your friends, families, and communities. Thank you to everyone at the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center, affectionately known as HMTC, for helping to make programs like Sundays with Survivors and 2G Tuesdays the success that they are. Also, special shout out to my amazing parents, the best cheerleaders, teammates, coaches, and fans and supporters. They're my best friends. They're amazing people. They instilled in me to be my best, trying to be like them every single day. If I can be just 1% of the mensch that they are, then I'm succeeding. And thank you to all the survivors, especially Henry Schachter, for sharing your testimony with us today. Welcome to Sundays with Survivors, a program that brings Holocaust survivors to people all over the world on a viewing platform that lets us share and preserve their testimony for generations to come. My name is Michael Mantell. I'm a psychotherapist, educator, and 3G, a grandchild of Holocaust survivors. In 2020, during the COVID pandemic lockdown, I reached out to HMTC about hosting a one-time private event for friends and family to honor my grandparents, Alice Diamond and Mickey Mendelovich. We called it Sundays with Survivors, and thank God the program was so successful that we did a second, a third, and so on. We continued to add events and then opened it up to the public. And in 2021, following the success of Sundays with Survivors, we added 2G Tuesdays, a program that brings children of Holocaust survivors and their families' testimonies to people all over the world. These programs have featured dozens of Holocaust survivors and their family members, have reached hundreds of people all over the world, and raised thousands of dollars to support the Holocaust Memorial and Tolerance Center and their educational programming. I'm grateful that we've been going strong for almost 2.5 years and counting. And most importantly, I'm grateful to this community, survivors, their families, and to all of you. In a few minutes, we'll be hearing from Holocaust survivor Henry Schachter, who will share testimony about the extraordinary bravery of both of his parents, who made the difficult decision in 1942 to give him away to a Christian couple to ensure his safety throughout the Holocaust, a journey that took his family from Berlin to Krakow, then Brussels, where he remained in hiding and was raised as a Catholic child while war was raging across Europe. The telling of his story is not only a tribute to his parents, but also to the incredible bravery of Belgian Christians to whom he owes his life. Following Henry's presentation, we will open up the program for Q&A. As I always say, no matter how incredible these programs are, and they truly are, the Q&A portion make them that much more meaningful. It's a time for all of us to interact, ask questions, share our experiences, and connect. So during that time, I ask you to please raise your virtual hand using the hand raise emoji, or type your comments or questions in the chat for me to share them with you. Or what I love is for you to unmute yourself at that point and speak. So you're welcome to do that. Just one more note, as many of you have made donations when signing up for this program, I'd like to say thank you for your generosity. Your contributions have helped HMTC continue to educate young people on the horrors and lessons of the Holocaust. If you still like to make a donation, there's always time. I will include a link in the chat, and I'll also include it in the follow-up email. Also, please feel free to reach out to HMTC to learn more about their community educational programs, their incredible small but mighty museum, and to find out ways that you can become involved with the center, either by volunteering your time, bringing students to the museum, or bringing HMTC's Holocaust education and tolerance building programs to a school near you. As a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, I'm incredibly grateful for all of the survivors and their families who come to these programs and share their families' testimonies with us. To organizations like HMTC that make Holocaust education a priority and their daily mission, and to friends like you who have made these programs so much more meaningful and successful. Your support of this program and the museum means the world to me. Thank you, and now I'd like to welcome Henry Schachter.
Good morning. Actually, it's afternoon here in Bournemouth, in southern England, but thank you very much for logging in to listen to my story. Usually I speak to schools or universities or even some adult groups as well, but in person rather than on this Zoom. I always say in my next life, I'll be very perfectly familiar with all these contraptions, but this life, it's gone beyond me. But thank you, Michael, for organizing this for me. I hope you can all see me all right and hear me. And thank you once again for attending. Please forgive me if I do a little bit of history before I actually start my own story as such, because it is relevant to what took place for me and to millions of other Jewish people during that period. I was born in March 1939, as you can see, and I'm only going to go as far as 1945 at the end of the war. Unfortunately, anti-Semitism has been a factor in our history right from the day one when Abraham first smashed all the idols in his father's house, and a mob of the good citizens of Ur, of Chaldees, decided to have a go at him with extreme prejudice, I might add. So he had to flee and go to the land of Canaan. And ever since then, some 4,000 years ago, throughout our history, anti-Semitism has been around, has always raised its head. I won't go into all the whys and wherefores. There are many of them, but we certainly know this is part of our historic necessity of somehow that we are always the scapegoats. I'll start with, of course, next slide. Yes, please. Next. Michael, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah, this is a cartoon actually my daughter found on an American program. My parents one day had to make a big decision. Either I am the boy on the right-hand side, the little boy in the ghetto, probably doomed for death, or do I become the boy on the left, holding the flag of the Jewish people with pride? And fortunately for me, they made that decision, although it was very painful at the time that I survived. Next, please. As I said, anti-Semitism was not unique to Germany. And in fact, this particular video, if you listen to it very carefully, I think you'll find amazing. Yes, please.
February 20th, 1939. Just months before Hitler invades Poland and ignites the deadliest war in history, thousands of Nazis gather for a rally at an indoor arena. But this isn't Nuremberg or Berlin. This is Madison Square Garden in New York City.
Yes, next, please. Yeah, I found it amazing when I saw that. I knew there were Nazis in America before the war, but I had no idea it was on such a scale and so open. But that was 80 years ago. One would have thought things might have changed, but has it? Next, please.
Do not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us! Jews will not replace us!
Unbelievable. That was in Virginia, I believe. I'm not sure which town, but nothing changes apparently. The next video is actually more meaningful to me and very, very upsetting as far as I'm concerned. I mean, back in, I just looked this up. Yeah, back in 1965, John Paul II told the Catholic world that Jews may no longer be blamed for the death of Jesus. This was again instigated in 2011 when Pope Benedict XVI also said exactly the same thing. So when I saw this, what took place in Poland in 2019, I was staggered, and I presume you will be too. Next, please. No, next, please. This is an effigy of a Hasidic Jew. That took place 40 kilometers from Belzec, where my grandfather, grandmother, and two of my aunts were taken in 1941 and never came out. And this is just 40 kilometers from where that happened. It's unbelievable. Anyway, let's go progress. My family actually came from Poland. They'd been living there. We can trace my father's side something like 270 years to a very famous rabbi whose name I forget at the moment. So my father's family came from Radom up here in Galicia, and my mother's family came from Tarnów down in the south. They didn't know each other, but they were both from religious but modern religion. History here. When Napoleon retreated from Moscow, Poland became up for grabs. It opened up the gates. So Russia quickly took the eastern side, Prussia grabbed the western side, and the Austrian-Hungarian Empire marched into Silesia and took the whole of the southern Upper Silesia. So for nearly over 100 years, there was no Poland. They were controlled by imperial powers. There were Polish people, Polish language, Polish culture, etc., but people were not happy with what was going on. And towards the late 1800s, because of better communication and everything, revolution was in the air. It wasn't just consigned to Poland, it was in Russia, in Balkans, all over the place. People were unhappy. And what happens when people are unhappy? They look for scapegoats. And sure enough, there were the Jews, lots of them, 3 million. 10% of the population to pick on, which is what they did. And the pogroms were very violent and horrendous. And my grandfather used to tell me stories of how when he came back from synagogue on one occasion, he saw a Jew with his peyot, you know, the hair hanging down, ripped out of the side of his face. Anyway, unknown to each other, both of them decided that they had to leave Poland. Both families, and they looked around, and the obvious place was there staring them in the face. Where do you go? Germany, because Germany at that time, before the First World War, was such an open society. You could be anything you wanted. You could be doctors, professors, lawyers, you name it. It was open to the Jews, musicians, whatever. So that's where they actually went. My mother's family to Frankfurt and my father's family to Berlin. And that's what we did. Next, please. Sorry, I keep clicking the thing. This is an amazing photograph, actually. It's actually a postcard as well as a photograph. On one side, it's a postcard. On the other side is a photograph. I didn't know they had that technology back in 1913. This is my great uncle, Samuel, with his with my grandmother's sister. and writing in Yiddish, "Come to Germany, don't hesitate anymore. Life is wonderful here. You'll be fine." Next, please. Yeah, so they did. So this is my mother's family at the time. My mother's on the left.
I can't see.
Can you see the arrow, by the way?
No.
No? Oh. On the left is my mother, Paula. In the middle is the oldest sister, Fanny. And then there's Tante Regina on the top right. And at the bottom is the youngest sister, Aunt Friedel. They were all born in Poland, but when my family arrived in Frankfurt, he had another 2 boys were added to the family. Next, please. Here they are. I don't know, there must have been something different in the water in Frankfurt. I don't know. They got girls in Poland and boys in Frankfurt. I don't know. Anyway, there's my uncle Adolf, the older of the 2, and my uncle Benny, or Benno, as he was called then, to join the family. So there were 6 of them there. Next, please. In 1863, just to show you how advanced the Jewish community was in Germany, they were so advanced, it was even before Germany became Germany, it was Prussia. The Reform Jewish movement was so wealthy and so ingrained in the society, they built this magnificent synagogue. It was a sort of based on Byzantium type architecture, and Chancellor Bismarck himself came to the opening ceremony. That shows how much respect he had, and the Germans had for the Jewish people at that time. It was the only synagogue that wasn't burnt to the ground in the Kristallnacht. They tried to do it. It was broken into by some hooligans, and they stripped the Sefer Torahs out of the tabernacle and all the prayer books and started a fire in the middle of the synagogue. But it was such an important building that the mayor of Berlin told the fire crews to actually put the fire out, which they did, and that's preserved the synagogue. However, that was only for a few years. It was never used as a place of prayer again. It held 3,000 people. Now, I don't know, in America, maybe there are temples that hold 3,000 people. There certainly isn't in England, that's for sure. Maybe in Israel, but that's an amazing amount of people. During the war, when Berlin was bombed heavily, 2/3 of the synagogue was destroyed. The thirds at the back, this is the front, that was saved. When the Jews returned and started looking through the rubble, because they were looking for holy scriptures, holy pieces of the Torah or something to have a proper burial, they found what I can only term as a time machine. And this is a little clip of it. Next, please. Yeah, this was the choir practicing for Yom Kippur. When I saw this clip, I was absolutely staggered. Hitler had said that the Jews of Berlin were not to be killed. They were to be used as slave labor. That's what he announced. But when I look at these choristers here, I can't help wondering how many of them were on that first transport of Berlin Jews that were sent to Riga in Latvia to go to the ghetto there. There was a train full of them, 1,000 people, 10 carriages, 100 in each carriage. But when they got to Riga, the Obersturmführer of the ghetto told the Untersturmführer of the convoy that there was absolutely no way Jews could be taken into the camp anymore. They were absolutely chock-a-block. He had to do something else. So using his initiative, he didn't want to go back to Berlin with the same train full of people. So he put the train in a siding and took some Russian prisoners of war up the track into the Rambella forest to a clearing and made them dig a 6-foot trench, long 6-foot trench. In the morning, the train pulled out of the station, went up to the appropriate place, and then one carriage at a time, 100 at a time, the Jews were told to get out, leave their baggage because they'll be coming back for it later. And then they were marched into the forest to the trench where they were told to undress naked and stand at the side of the trench, and they were shot 100 at a time, probably in batches because they didn't have 100 soldiers to shoot them all in one go. So can you imagine by the time it got to the 8th or 9th or 10th carriage, how full the trench would be and what the thoughts of the people were? It's absolutely horrific to think of it. But this was a scene that was repeated time and time again. I just thought I'd share that with you. Next, please. Yeah. Okay, we come to the Wannsee conference. I'm sure a lot of you would know about it, but I've been asked to include it because I do mention this in my school talks where they haven't heard it. It was planned to eliminate the entire European Jewry, over 11 million. When they conquered England, you will be able to see down there 330,000 English Jews were going to be murdered from all over. It's unbelievable. Even countries like Spain and you know, places where they weren't occupying, but they would have put enough pressure on the government to make sure that they let the Jews go for the Nazis to deal with them. It's horrendous. It was the whole decision was rubber stamped in 1.5 hours. I was at the Wannsee conference with my daughter actually a few years ago, and actually in the room where the 12 members of the high German society, they rubber stamped it, members of the different cabinets who had to approve it. It was a horrendous decision, but there we go. And after an hour and a half, they all approved it. So they had a sort of common guilt, if you like. Reinhard Heydrich didn't want to be solely responsible. He wanted other people to be responsible for this decision as well. Okay, let's go to the next. Right, so until after the First World War, life was very good, as I said, for the Jews. But once they lost the war in 1918, it was amazing change took place because suddenly you had 3 million soldiers going home, no jobs, and it wasn't like social services today. You couldn't have your you know, everything, handouts. You had proud soldiers standing on street corners selling shoelaces and matchsticks. So it wasn't hard for the Nazis to say to them, listen, guys, this wasn't your fault. We were stabbed in the back. And who did it? The Jews. They brought America into the war. They brought Russia into the war. They're communists, they're capitalists, they're everything you can possibly imagine. That they're bringing Germany down to its knees, and that's their intention. So join us and promise you that things will get better. So let's have the next one. Every month there would be a new, this is the Nazi newspaper, and it shows you the the blood libel, you know, where it's depicted that Jews on Passover slaughter a Christian child and use the blood to make matzah, the Passover bread. This wasn't something new that they thought up. In fact, the first time this was accused, Jews were accused of this, was in England in 1144. And 3 times Jews were massacred before they were expelled from England in 1250. 3 times the Jewish communities were massacred because of somebody finding a Christian child killed and with his throat cut, and they blamed the Jews for it. Anyway, so the Nazis typically brought it back. By the way, there are countries in the world, I won't say which, who actively use this right now in the, well, we know where. Okay, next please. Right, so the Nazis didn't have it so easy initially, but by the time they got into power in 1933, they knew and they had a plan that the youth of the country were really, without the youth, there was no hope of achieving their aims. Now, we've heard this word radicalization a lot lately, obviously. We know all about it. But they were they really went to town on the Hitler Youth. Every boy had to join the Hitler Youth at the age of 10 to 14. Then he went into the senior Hitler Youth till 18. And from 18, then he went straight into the army. And it was really a radicalization, brainwashing of the first degree. You see the next tape, please. This is a rally in Nuremberg.
Mein Führer, meine Kameraden, wieder erleben wir diese Stunde, die uns stolz und glücklich macht. Nach Ihrem Befehl, mein Führer, steht hier eine Jugend, die keine Klasse und keine Kaste kennt. Nach Ihnen formt sich die junge Generation unseres Volkes, weil Sie die höchste Selbstlosigkeit dieser Nation voranleben, will auch diese Jugend selbstlos sein, weil sie die Treue für uns verkörpern. Darum wollen auch wir treu sein. Adolf Hitler, der Führer der deutschen Jugend, hat das Wort.
Yes, those same Hitler Youth that were being urged to be so loyal and faithful to the Führer, what did he do? He sent them in thousands, hundreds of thousands to their death, refusing to let them retreat on the Russian front. And it wasn't just the boys, it was the girls as well. They were in a Bundes des Deutsches Mädchen, League of German Girls. Here too, they were given uniforms. They were told to help the farmers during the harvest. Yeah, let's start the video and show you. I'll actually speak over this. Their job was to have 4 children for the fatherland, basically, and for that they had to be healthy. So a lot of exercise and physical exercise was required. They learned first aid, and it was wonderful for them because a lot of them had never been on a holiday. So there were camps in the summer, in the winter, and it was all jolly good fun. They also marched in the streets. Uniformity was very much required. only 2 styles of hair, short or plaits. Unfortunately, okay, thanks. From the same ranks came 4,700 camp guards, female camp guards. Now I'm going to show you just 4 that my mother would have known because she would have come across them. On the left was a giant of a woman, 6'4". She had such a amazing, well, I don't know what the word is, on the prisoners, just by her presence alone would have frightened anybody. She was actually in charge of all the evacuations once the Russians started arriving at the concentration camps. She was put in charge of the evacuation to Bergen-Belsen, and that's how my mother would have come across her. She was given 15 years imprisonment, and if the Russians had caught her, she would have hung. The one on the right, Elizabeth Falkenrath, she was a lot smaller in stature, but she was certainly not smaller in viciousness. She was in charge of the women's prison in Bergen-Belsen. She was actually charged with crimes against humanity and then was hung. Next, please. The third one, Joanna Bormann, she was known as the guard with the dog. She had a vicious dog, and she let the dog loose anytime she fancied it. It was trained to bite the prisoners, and if you were bitten by one of these prisoners, it was a death sentence, because there was no antiseptics, there was no antibiotics, you didn't have clean bandages, you didn't have a plaster, and being so physically run down anyway, your body didn't have the antibodies. It festered, your wounds festered, and you died, basically. She too was hung for crimes against humanity. Next, please. Hertha Erhardt, she was known as the guard with the whip. Her favorite thing to do was to whip prisoners across the head and face. She used to get herself into huge rages for nothing at all, for the smallest thing. You've just glance at her and she didn't like the look of you. She too was only given 15 years imprisonment. She got out in 7 and lived a long and happy life. Okay, next please. Right, now we come to my story, Kristallnacht. I'm sure a lot of people know about this, maybe somebody doesn't, but briefly, it was the night in November 1938 when the Hitler Youth and SS were given free rein to beat up Jews, persecute Jews, do whatever they like. And it was called Kristallnacht because of the sound of breaking glass, because they were smashing up all the Jewish shops all over Germany and Austria, and burning down all the synagogues. Thousands of, I don't know, 1,500 odd synagogues were burnt to the ground, except the one in Berlin, as I said before. Now, 10 days prior to this, Hitler had actually ordered all Polish subjects out of Germany. He wanted to pick a fight with Poland. And that was the best way he could think of doing it. He decided they had to go. 160,000 Jews were amongst those Poles in Austria and Germany. As soon as the Polish government heard that this was going to happen, they brought a law in saying, if you haven't visited Poland in the last 5 years, you can't come in. So a lot of people hadn't. So what happened? They got off the train in Germany, walked through to the border, and were not allowed in. So they were stuck in no man's land in the middle of winter. Can you imagine in November how cold it was? I'm totally unprepared. So thousands of them were stuck in no man's land. My grandparents were luckier with my aunts, and they got into Poland, although they were only allowed in a particular border town. And my father had gone with them to settle them in. My mother didn't have to go, because she was registered in Frankfurt and living in Berlin, so they got the things mixed up a bit. So she was allowed to stay. 3 days later, the Poles decided that they had enough of this, so they were going to expel all the Germans in Poland, which was totally against what Hitler had wanted. So he rescinded the thing, and you could come back if you wanted to. Those Poles who wanted to come back did after 3 days. But my grandparents and 2 of my aunts decided they'd had enough of Nazi Germany, so they stayed there. But my father was still, he had his wife in Berlin, so he went back to Berlin, although they were planning, once they could sell their business, to leave as well. When I say leave, it was very, very difficult. Nobody wanted Jewish refugees. Everybody had certain numbers only, and it was impossible to get visas, really, apart from maybe a few in Cuba and South America and some in Shanghai, I believe, but it was very hard. In fact, America had a 10-year wait before you could join the queue to come into America at that time. So it was very hard. And my mother, with my father away, listening to what was going on with all the shouting and screaming and the burning synagogues, was frightened. She'd heard that people were being attacked in their own flat. So she was 4 months pregnant, and she was frightened. So she wanted to go to a friend's house, to a flat, for some safety. So as she was walking along the street, suddenly she heard an enormous crash behind her. And from a first floor window came an entire upright piano out of the first floor window of a block of flats. It crashed a few feet behind her. And the noise and the thing was so enormous, she fainted and was rushed to hospital. And for 3 or 4 days, it was touch and go. Next, please. It was touch and go if she would survive at all. This is one of the synagogues burning, but she did survive. Next, please. And that's the proof. And I'm here also to prove it. That's me. I did survive, although the look on my face, I don't know if you can see it, seems to be saying, oh my God, what have you brought me into? What sort of a world is this? Obviously, it was the flash of the camera, but this amuses the children I talk to quite a bit. So she survived that, and we did, in fact, go to Poland. Next case, please. Right. So by 1938, all those Hitler Youth boys, they were already in the army, and they were ready for the next stage, which was to conquer Europe. And this is what it looked like. Next, please. Can you stop it there, please? Now, you can imagine, I mean, my wife was telling me later that people used to go to the cinema a lot. Obviously, there was no television. And during Pathé News, they would see this marching troops by the thousands. And they knew that England was nowhere near prepared for another war. And it was very frightening seeing this. So some boffin, they had one secret weapon. There was the British sense of humor. And some boffins at Pinewood Studio decided they'd lighten up the mood a little bit by bringing this out. Next, please. To the tune of Lambeth Walk. Okay, they had a good laugh, and it broke the fear a bit. Okay, so my family were escaping from Germany, or trying to escape. 3 of my father's brothers and 1 sister had left in 1933, as soon as Hitler came to power, to go to occupied Palestine, as it was then, Israel as it is today, in spite of the very, very controlled number of people that were allowed in. They somehow managed to get in. I think some of them went on Aliyah Bet, which was the underground way of getting into Palestine without permission. So they left there, and my mother's family, 2 aunts and 2 uncles, came to Great Britain. The girls on 1-year visas as au pairs, and the boys as theology students, also for 1 year. But of course, the war broke out in September 39, so they were stuck in Britain, and they were allowed to stay. But as far as my mother and father are concerned, there was no hope. We had to go back to Poland, being Polish passport holders. That was the only place to go. But my father knew that Hitler certainly had designs on Poland, and it wouldn't be for long before there would be some terrible action taking place. So he had a sister-in-law, my Aunt Fanny, who lived in Belgium, and he was told that if he went and knocked on enough doors in Belgium, maybe he could get a visa for me and my mother to come and join him in Brussels. So he went on a business visa. You couldn't get a normal visa. And 1 week before the war started, he arrived in Brussels, and then sure enough, a week later, September 1st, the Wehrmacht marched into Poland. Can we have the next, please? Oh, this is my uncle Jakob in Palestine, as it was then, working on a kibbutz initially, and then they went to a moshav, which was like a cooperative village. And you can see the sort of soil they were working on, growing vegetables on rocky soil where nothing had grown before. Okay, next, please. That's my mother and father when they were engaged. And I'll show you something a little later. Next, please. Yeah, I found this when I went to Berlin a couple of years ago. I hadn't been to Berlin for 79 years. We left when I was 6 months old, and I never went back till I was 79, yeah. But I found this is their marriage certificate. Next, please. And it just shows you, look at that. On their marriage certificate in 1937, they still had to have the Nazi stamp, the Hakenkreuz and the eagle stamped, and they had to have this carried around for the rest of their lives, the Nazi emblem. Okay. Next, please. So we went to Poland, but not for long. As I said, my father was very worried about what would happen. So he tried to get a visa, but he also had another idea. In case he couldn't get a visa, maybe if my mother could get to Krakow, from Tarnów to Krakow was only about 50 kilometers, there were people there who would issue, what's the word I'm looking for, Hope? False papers, false travel documents and false passports and all the rest. So that was another thing that might work. Next, please. It was terribly important for them to do this because behind the Wehrmacht came these guys, the Einsatzgruppen, death head squads. They consisted of 3,000 volunteer SS who had nothing but Nazism in their brains, and they were determined to carry out the Führer's instructions. And their job was to find and locate and shoot Jews and Gypsies. If there were too many to be dealt with, they could round them up and stick them into ghettos to be dealt with later. The officers wore that insignia on their hats, on their caps, and the soldiers wore it on their lapels, and it told you in no uncertain terms, we are the Einsatzgruppen, you do what you're told to do, and there's no getting away from it. You know, they presented a really horrific, frightening face against any opposition. 3,000 were not enough, but anyway, that's what they started with in Poland. Next, please. Yeah, they'd go to a village, they'd find the Jews, separate them from the rest of the community and take them out into a field and make them dig their own graves, and then they'd be shot, one squad at a time. Yes, next, please. This is a very, very well-known place just south of Kiev, 50 kilometers south of Kiev in the Ukraine. It's called Babi Yar, a ravine called Babi Yar. There was a very famous poem by a Russian poet called Babi Yar. Here they persuaded 32,000 Jews from Kiev to come here, and they were all murdered within 48 hours. The Jews were told they were going to be relocated in the east, only bring one case with you, and then they were put on trucks and they arrived here, and within, next please, within minutes they were stripped naked and shot. 32,000 in 48 hours. Later on, it rose to 100,000. Yeah, next, please. Okay, 3,000, however, Einsatzgruppen were not enough. So when they invaded Russia, they asked for volunteers from the local communities, mostly ex-policemen. They were given something like $400 or $500 extra a month. And they certainly got enough volunteers. 27,000 Latvian, Lithuanian, Ukrainian volunteered to join the Einsatzgruppen and become Jewish extermination squads. This is what it looked like in some of these towns. Next, please.
The propaganda was effective. Jews were murdered in broad daylight in the streets by Ukrainian nationalists.
This took place in Kiev.
Ukraine.
Next, please. In Lviv or Lvov or Lemberg, this also took place.
Local people terrorized and murdered thousands of Jews over 3 days.
Yeah. I don't show that to schools because I don't want to, make it too impossible for them to see these things. So next, please. Yeah, these people were lucky. This was also in Lvov or Lviv. They were taken into a back alley. They didn't have to suffer the indignity of being stripped. Next, please. And they were just shot in the back alley there up against the wall. Okay, next, please. Right, so how important it was to get out of Poland. So Mother and I decided we would take the option of going to Krakow and try and get false papers, which cost a lot of money, admittedly. But anyway, we went there and we stayed with a second cousin, next please, called Heinz Wermuth, also a Henry. He wrote a book actually called Breathe Deeply, My Son, about his own experiences. And he mentions me and my mother in his book when we arrived at the flat. And I was little Ariel. My name is Ariel in Hebrew and on my passport. He mentions little Ariel had his bib, and on it was embroidered his name in red, blah, blah. And we had plans to leave Poland. And if only my father were here, maybe we could all have gone together. But anyway, he wasn't. So I won't go into details about the photograph and Breathe Deeply, My Son. Anyway, so next, please. Yeah, he was captured and with his father, and he spent next 4 years in 6 slave labor camps. This is part of the book where he mentions our arrival. Next, please. So we got the passports. Now here starts a story that really Steven Spielberg should make a film of. My mother was 29 years old and she was traveling on false papers, trying to get to Belgium. War, it was wartime. Britain and France had declared war. Admittedly, it was called the phony war because there wasn't much happening on the ground. But nevertheless, there was wartime and everything, you know, everybody was frightened of spies and whatnot. So she left Poland, traveled through Czechoslovakia, into Germany, and onto the border with Belgium near the Ardennes forest. Can you imagine? Every stop, the Geheimpolizei, the Gestapo, would get on the train and demand to see their travel documents. Geheimpolizei, yeah, Papieren bitte, Ausweisung, let's have a look at your thing. And she had to tell them some story. Luckily, she'd been brought up in Germany and spoke perfect German. God knows what sort of story she told them. Maybe there were a lot of Germans living in Poland, so maybe I'm visiting my parents to show them my baby, blah, blah. I don't know what it was she's told them, but she managed to get there to the Ardennes forest with me and not be arrested. When we got there, can you do the next one, please? When we got there, which is just on the right-hand side there, near the town, you know, this is where the Battle of the Bulge took place, near Namur, yeah, on this side. Bastogne, you're very familiar with, I'm sure, especially in America. There were 20 people waiting to be taken across by the smuggler. I was crying. It was December 1939, and the weather was horrendously cold. I was teething, and he's looked at me and he said, "I'm sorry, I can't take you and your baby because they'll give us away. Give him this pill, and it'll quieten him down, and I'll take these people across, and in a few hours, as long as you don't move from this spot, in a few hours, I'll come back and get you." And off they went. And then my mother was left there in the middle of the Ardennes, scared stiff. Would a Nazi patrol pick us up? Would I start crying again? Would the smuggler even bother to come back? I mean, he'd been paid. He'd taken 19 people across the border. You know, he thought he's done a fair job. But he was an honest man, a righteous man, and he did come back across the border and collected me and my mother. And at last, we reached Brussels and were joined up with my father. And thank God, at last, we're away from those Nazis. After so many years of Nazis, we were in a free country because Belgium was neutral. Thank God we got rid of the Nazis. That lasted exactly 4 months, because in May of 1940, using exactly the same route as we had taken through the Ardennes forest, the Wehrmacht did the impossible, what nobody thought could happen. The Panzer divisions smashed through the forests and attacked Belgium, Holland, and Denmark, and the war had heated up. Obviously, the Jews in Belgium were extremely keen to get the hell out, and we were told that if we went to Zeebrugge, up on the right, on the left there, on the port of Zeebrugge, there may be a boat, or if not Zeebrugge, Ostende, and if not Ostende, La Panne, and if not La Panne, Plan D, nip into France. Well, that was all well and good, and off we set with other families. Next, please. Yeah, here you can see the Gross family dashing away from Brussels. We didn't have a van. We had what do they call them? A trolley, like they use on in markets, a market trolley on wheels. And my parents and my aunt and uncle and my cousin Marcel, we put our luggage on that and we started walking towards the coast. Problem was that at the same time as, is it possible to go back a second? Yeah, at the same time as we were running away from the advancing Germans, the British and French, they had decided that they would meet the Germans head on. They're not going to get stuck in trench warfare like they did in the First World War. So they dashed into the whole of the British Expeditionary Force, something like 300,000 men, and everything they had, dashed into Belgium to meet the Germans. But this is exactly what the Wehrmacht wanted, because using another 2 or 3 divisions, they smashed their way south through Luxembourg and into France and up towards the Channel ports. As soon as the British and French realized what the trap that they were in, they started to evacuate themselves out of, as fast as possible, out of Belgium. So we were mixed in with retreating troops. It was terrible. Every now and again, a Stuka would come down and machine gun the roads to create as much chaos as possible to delay the Allies from retreating. And every time they did that, we had to jump into a trench on either side of the road till the planes were gone. In one of these attacks, my father was wounded in his left arm, quite badly, actually. And he was patched up by one of the medics. And when we told them what we were doing, they said, oh, forget about it. There's no boats. Otherwise, we'd be taking the boats there. And don't bother about France, because the Germans are already in France and they're heading to the Channel ports. You're not going to get anywhere. So reluctantly, we went back. We couldn't move forward. There was nowhere to go. And we went back to Brussels. My father actually went to Antwerp. There was a hospital there, and he spent the next 6 weeks actually in the hospital there, I discovered later on. Next, please. Okay, and the next, please. Now, within 1 month of the invasion of Belgium, all Belgian citizens, whether they're Jewish or not Jewish, had to re-register for identity cards at the local police stations. And this is the identity card which someone found for me in Belgium of my parents. You can see it's 1 month after the invasion. They invaded in May, and this is dated June. And it was a 6 months identity card. And I don't know, you probably can see it on this screen, why this is also a death warrant for Jewish people. You can't reply, so I'll tell you. On the left above the picture, it says Juif. Judah, Jew. Now, Catholics didn't have to have their religion stamped, or Protestants, or Mormons, or anybody else, Jews. So if you were picked up, not only did you have to wear a Star of David, which I'll come to in a second, but you also had to provide them with the identity card. And if you didn't have your identity card, there was a severe fine, something like $1,000, or 10 days in prison. That was for everybody, Jewish or not Jewish. Next, please. Yeah, this one really touched me very much when I saw, I haven't got anything from my mother's, and this is my mother's thumbprint on the back of their card. And it just, when I first saw it, it was very, very emotional that I saw this thumbprint of hers. Yep. Okay, this is a picture from the fall of Paris, when the Germans occupied Paris. At first, they didn't have Einsatzgruppen for a start in the West. They knew that Belgians and Dutch, they weren't going to just happily hand over the Jews just like that. And anyway, they were far too busy planning the invasion of Britain. They had already had the boats ready. They were just waiting for the right for the Air Force to be destroyed. So they were going to invade Britain. They didn't have time to deal with Jews in the West. So you provided you registered and you got your identity cards and you wore your yellow Star of David, you were left alone. This gentleman here, it looks like he could have well been an officer in the French army in the First World War. He looks like a very dignified man, and he's made to wear this symbol of inferiority, divided from the rest of the population, to make him feel small and humiliated. All over Europe, this is where they insisted on you wearing yellow Stars of David. Yeah, next, please. Right, so we were trapped in Belgium, And knowing what was going on in Poland, okay, knowing what was going on in Poland, we knew that there's only one thing to do, and that's to go into hiding, which is what we did. We went in, we found a warehouse where the owner was, for a price, obviously, was allowed us to be in hiding. What's the matter? Nothing. Allowed us to go in, and they did 2 rows of packing cases from the floor to the ceiling, stuffed with stuff so that they would deafen the sound. And we lived on one side, and on the other side, life went on as normal. Vans came and went and delivered parcels and took all the stuff away. My mother couldn't stand it. Can you imagine? During the day, nobody was allowed to breathe. You couldn't flush a toilet. You couldn't say anything. You had to be absolutely silent. How do you keep a 1-year-old baby silent and not to cry during the day, only to cry at night? It was driving her mad. I don't know what she did to shut me up, but whatever it was, she begged my father, please, Reuben, don't let's stay here. I can't stand it. I don't want to be responsible for all these people's lives. So he agreed, and we left that hiding place to live out in the open in a flat in Brussels. Next, please. Now, my father was obviously totally skint by then. Skint, by the way, means having no money, and had to go to work. Now, in order to go to work and not get caught or picked up, he didn't wear his Star of David, and he didn't carry around his giveaway identity card. And one day, on the 26th of April, he was accosted by a Belgian policeman, asked for his identity cards, didn't have them. Okay, $1,000 fine, didn't have that. Right, 10 days in prison. And that's what happened. So he was sent to Saint-Gilles, actually a prison not far from Saint-Gilles Church, where I used to go later on. And he did his 10 days till the 6th of May, 1942. When he came out, the warden of the prison said to him, Mr. Schachter, be very careful, because now the Gestapo are hunting down the Jews seriously. And there's convoys leaving Brussels full of Jews going to the east. Be very careful. So when he came back and told my mother this, next please, obviously they were terrified of what would happen if we were caught. But they'd heard about an underground movement, mostly consisting of Christians, who took Jewish children and sent them to Christian families all over Belgium. And in fact, Belgium had the highest rate of saving of Jewish children in all of Europe in proportion to the population. 3,000 Jewish children were saved by Christian families. Now, being taken in by a Christian family, that took an enormous amount of courage, because there was a very heavy penalty. You could certainly go to prison if you harbored a Jew. You would probably finish up in a slave labor camp, depending on your age, or you could even be shot, depending on how many Jews you'd saved. So it was not just a simple, all right, we'll adopt you sort of thing. And what about all the uncles and aunts and friends of the family who knew, they said, who is this kid? They all kept stumm or quiet. They didn't give away the children. So one day I was taken to this lady, next please, Mademoiselle André Guren. She was a 20-year-old nursery school teacher. This is a picture of her in Brussels. You can see behind her, there's a Luftwaffe pilot or whatever. And she's got a very anxious look. Why are you taking a photograph of me? I don't know who took this. Anyway, I was taken into her nursery school. One day I was Ariel Schachter, little Jewish boy. Next, please. There I am. And 3 days later, I came out, and my name was no longer Ariel Schachter. It was Henri de Fay, which is why I call myself Henry these days. Henri de Fay, and I became a little Catholic boy, living with what I was told were grandparents, not that I knew what a grandparent was, and my only language was French, and I was a good little Catholic, and I was living with them because they were a bit older than middle-aged couple. Next, please. Yeah. So this is her, the same lady in I think it was 96, explaining how, can you stop it? Yeah, explaining how they worked the system. Every kid was given a number, and only the number traveled somewhere else. And then, anyway, it was a complicated method so that Nazis, if they did find someone, they wouldn't know where to look for anybody else. Amazing lady. She saved so many. Next, please. Okay, it's just as well that they gave me away, because as you can see from this, my parents had to move 3 times. Whenever somebody got suspicious, who are these people? They moved elsewhere in Brussels. Next, please. Just as well, they did give me away, because more often than not, this would be the fate of some of those children rounded up. Next, please. They would be introduced to these things, the gas vans. These were not vans which ran on gas. These were vans in which children were gassed. It was a highly organized thing which had taken place even in Germany in 1935 against their own population. Anybody with any sort of physical or mental incapacity, if they were thought to be useless, they were either euthanized with injections, or if they could move, they were put into these gas vans. Next, please. So they had the system already up and running. The vans would be, this is taken from a Polish film after the war. It's called The Ambulance, with a Z. You could look it up. It only takes 15 minutes, it's long. The vans were reinforced and hermetically sealed, and the children would be put in 10 per square meter. Next, please. 10 per square meter. Those were actors, but these are actual children on their way. And I could easily have been one of those kids, about the same age, actually, easily. And like all good kids, you know, they're told, listen to listen to people, adults, and do what you're told, and walk quietly. And that's what they're doing. Yeah. Lambs to the slaughter. Next, please. Yeah, you can see, because people could only pack one case, they dressed their children in the best possible clothes. And you can see this, the little sailor suits, which were very popular at that time. They put on their best clothes to go to their deaths. Yeah. Okay, next, please. As I said, it was highly organized. There are 26 paragraphs like this by Unter Barnsturmfuhrer, who made a study of what was going on in order to increase the speed and efficiency of this method of killing. How you should leave the light on. They describe it as cargo, the cargo. They don't say children. Next, please. And how you should leave the light on, because it's been noticed that if the light's not on, when the doors are closed, the screaming and the panic starts earlier, and it's impossible to close the door properly. It took about 4 to 5 minutes before all noise ceased in the vans. One can just imagine what was taking place. Well, one would rather not imagine. Okay, next, please. So once again, just to show the difference between what could have happened to me and didn't. In fact, that boy on the right, he survived, and I met him. His name was Ariel Simonsen, He was also hidden. His mother got him out of the ghetto. This is the boy from the Warsaw Ghetto. Israeli scientists came and measured his face and everything, and they agreed, yes, it's him. He wrote a book about his experience, and I met him. He lived not far from Bournemouth, where I live, 15 miles down the road. I couldn't believe it. And that soldier who's pointing his Schmeisser machine pistol at him, he actually was captured by the East German police in 1968, and he was hung in 1969 for helping in the murder of 3,000 Jews. So he got his deserts. Yeah, next, please. This is where I went to live, in Rue de la Victoire in Brussels. I took this picture when I was 11 with my little box camera. It's been, it's been renovated now, obviously, but I remember it so well. I remember spending most of my time down in the cellar. I wasn't allowed to have friends. That would be far too dangerous. I wasn't allowed to go to school. That was also far too dangerous. So I was homeschooled, as it were. And I spent most of my time down in the basement. Occasionally, we'd go to church once a week. I think it was mostly on a Sunday evening. And I remember seeing the German soldiers walking up and down on the other side of the road very nonchalantly. They were the rifles slung over their backs. They weren't bothered at all. We went to church, which was an amazing experience, because suddenly from the dim lights in the streets, the dim yellow light, suddenly to come into this magnificent church and all the lights, and it was all wonderful, wonderful. Actually, my parent, as I called him, loved his tobacco. And in order to get it, he used to make saccharine and sell it on the black market. And I used to help him. My job was to sift the pills. So he'd make the pills and it would drop into the sieve, and I would sift it. And as a reward for doing that, he had a row of pipes on the wall, from long ones to short ones. And the one at the end, the very shortest, became my pipe. And he showed me how to put the tobacco into the pipe, how to light it. I still got a cough. Oh, excuse me. I tell the children not to do this at home. It's not suggested to do. And we used to puff away on this thing. And, yeah. Anyway, so I remember it very well. Things were very hard. I used to watch all the feet going by, wondering where on earth are they going. Yes, next, please. The only amusement I had actually was secondhand copies of these two comics, Barbar the Elephant and Tintin. And my entire life, children have got amazing imaginations. My entire life was sunk into the stories of these two characters. I joined them, literally, I joined them as if I'd been, downloaded into the story. Yeah, next, please. One day on my 5th birthday, my mother came to pay me a visit. It was amazing. Next, please. Somehow she had managed to find the ingredients to make a cake. And she came to see me, and we had the cake, and I showed her my comics. And after about an hour and a half, it was time for her to go. And when I realized she wasn't taking me with her, I was so upset. I ran to the top of the stairs and I sat there refusing to come down and say goodbye to her. I watched her put on her coat and her scarf, and with one last look round her back over her shoulder, she waved at me and gave me a kiss. Oh, yeah, Liebchen, yeah. And she walked out the door and out of my life, and that was the last time I ever saw her. It's a memory I carry with me to this day. Next case, please. Okay, so 7 weeks after her visit to me, they were finally captured. They were lying in bed one night in the block of flats, and they heard heavy footsteps running up the stairs. My father, who had always been one step ahead of the Nazis, he made an instant decision which cost them their lives. He had to make a decision. He knew that my mother had dealt with the Nazis before and was quite successful, whereas a cursory glance at him and they'd know he was Jewish. So in a second, he went out onto the balcony. Anyway, they were arrested and taken to Gestapo headquarters. And after being interrogated, the officer there said very gleefully, you know, Herr Schachter, if you hadn't gone on the balcony, you wouldn't be here now, because we were looking for someone else in the block of flats. But we had a soldier outside and he saw you at 2 o'clock in the morning going onto the balcony. So that's why you're here. And he took great delight in telling my father that. That just shows you, you know, you make a wrong decision and you've had. How are we doing? Are we doing all right? Are we still there? Yeah, anyway, they were arrested. Can I come back to the previous one a minute? Yeah, here. Just to show you, they went on the penultimate convoy to Auschwitz. There was only one convoy afterwards, and on ticket number 306 and 307, I think, or it could be 305 or 307, I don't know. It just shows you, in the East, they packed you into cattle trucks, you know, like sardines. In the West, they used normal transport. And in the West, you had to pay for your ticket. You were obliged to pay for your ticket. And if you wanted to travel first class, you could travel first class, pay the money, and you can go to your death first class. There's a very good scene, actually, in Escape from Sobibor, where a convoy from Holland comes along. You should see it and have a look and see what happens to this lady who comes along. Anyway, so they went to Auschwitz. Yes, next, please. Coming near the end now. They were selected for work, like these people here. The others that are not going to work are at the top, already walking towards the gas chambers, which is about half a kilometer further up the track. My mother was chosen because they spoke perfect German and they were fairly healthy, was chosen to work in Birkenau kitchens. And my father, next one please, was put on one of these commandos, as they called it, to work in the factories that surrounded the camps. They survived Auschwitz 9 months. Every month there would be a selection and you had to prove that you could work. And it is amazing how they survived 9 months in Auschwitz. When the Russians started approaching the camp, obviously, they tried to destroy whatever evidence there was, but they still needed slave laborers. So both my mother and my father were considered fit enough to be slave laborers. So they were taken on what's called the death marches. My father, next please, he was taken to initially Grossrosen, which was a huge camp, slave labor camp on the border with Poland, but not for long. And then he was moved to Flossenburg in southern Germany, another concentration camp. Next, please. That was a death march, which was horrendous. I mean, literally, they were helping each other, just supporting each other, sleeping as they were walking almost. My mother was taken on open wagons to Belsen in northern West Germany. When she got there, there was a huge epidemic of typhoid. She was already weakened from 9 months in Auschwitz, and the journey, which took about 3 weeks in an open cart with very little water and no food. God knows how she survived it. Anyway, she caught the typhoid, and I heard it from someone later on when I met in Belgium who was with her, and she told me, I had your mother in my arms. And I begged her, I said, Paula, hold on. The guards are already leaving. The camp's going to be liberated, but she passed away. She couldn't, she just couldn't bear it anymore. And my father, who was in Flossenburg, the Jews were put into a quarry to smash up rocks. The Polish prisoners and Russian prisoners were used for inside, indoors in a factory. But the Jews were put to work in the quarry. And after a week, my father said again to the guy that I heard it from, said to him, I'm going to die in the next few days. I can't take it anymore. I'm going to make a run for it, because Flossenburg's in Bavaria and there were forests all around, and he spoke perfect German, so he thought he'd run for it. I mean, you can imagine what sort of running he did. Anyway, when he thought nobody was watching, he made a sort of a dash towards the forest, but somebody saw him and shot him, and that's where he was killed. Next, please. No, next, please. Let's leave that one out. Yeah, this is just a picture of Germany and the concentration camps and slave labor camps that went between 1939 and 1945. And if you asked any German in 1945, did you know anything about all these camps? Nobody knew a thing. Of course not, never existed. Prisoners of war, including Americans, were made to work. You know, only the officers weren't meant to work. They were made to work very hard. Yeah, next, please. Okay, coming to the end. Epilogue. Henry Schachter to Henri de Fay and back again. One day a marvelous thing happened. The 1st of September 1944, actually, an armoured regiment of the Welsh Guards decided to pay a visit to Brussels, and I was there to welcome them. Next, please. And this is what I remember of it. If we can play it. Yeah, here we go. I was amongst that crowd. I desperately wanted to go on a tank. Okay, next, please. Right, my uncle Jonas, that was married to my aunt Fanny, he came out of hiding. He was in the diamond business. 3 days after the liberation of Brussels, he wanted to go to Antwerp to see who was left alive still in Antwerp from his colleagues. So he got on a tram to go to the station in Brussels. And after about 10 minutes on the tram, he realized he was going in the wrong direction. He got vergischt, got mixed up. So he got off, crossed the road, and waited for a tram to go the other way. And as he's standing there, he sees a little boy on the other side skipping along the street, going, "La guerre finie, la guerre finie, la guerre finie." Well, the guerre wasn't finie yet. There was still the Battle of the Bulge to come. But anyway, the Germans were gone, and he's looking at him and he's thinking, gosh, look at that. Even little children are so happy the Nazis are gone. And just at that moment, the boy looks at him with a puzzled look on his face, runs across the road, arms outstretched, "Papa, Papa," into his arms, and he looks down and he said, "Ariel," which is short for Ariel. And it was me. I thought he was my father, because I remember my father was quite short. And the way my uncle was looking at me, even from a distance, with such empathy, I felt sure this is somebody I knew, this is my father. And that's how I was found 3 days after the liberation of Brussels. Many Jewish children were never found, of course, because there was nobody there to look for them. I don't say that I wouldn't have been found, but it would have taken a long time. Next, please. Okay, this is me and my parents, maman, as you can see. This was taken in July 1945, before I came to England. I had to wait another 6 months before I was given permission to come to England. They were an incredible couple. As I said, he and I were the best of mates. All right, next one and last one. Here we go. Now, you'll all be familiar with this. I have to remind school children here what it was, because they don't really know. It's the Twin Towers, of course, and the terrible, terrible tragedy that happened there. Nearly 3,000 men and women were murdered that day. I'm not trying to belittle the event. In fact, America and her allies went to war for 20 years because of it. So it was a horrendous occasion which echoed right round the world. But consider this, as far as the Holocaust is concerned, imagine, on average, 3,000 Jewish men, women, and children were murdered every single day of the week, on average, for 5.5 years. 5.5 years. So it just puts into, I mean, I'm not, this was a terrible event, which of course should never have happened. But just to put it in proportion, something to think about. Right, that's it. Whoever's left, if you haven't gone to lunch, I'm very happy to answer any of your questions. So thank you very much for listening. Oh, here's Michael again.
Henry, this was incredible. I think you have all of us captivated the entire time. You weave history and your family's story together so incredibly. It puts into perspective what we sometimes hear in history class, and it's just an afterthought. And here you're describing how these had dire consequences for you, your family, and the Jewish people, and people all over the world. So all I could say is thank you.
Yeah,
it's truly incredible.
65 million people lost their lives during the Second World War. 25 million Russians alone.
I feel like we all need to take a breath after that. It was truly incredible. So thank you. I was going to open it up the floor for comments and questions, and I see my wonderful, beautiful, amazing parents are here, and my father, I think, wants to say something. My father, Eddie.
Henry, it was unbelievable. You touched me. I mean, I've never heard a story like this in the way you told it. Thank you very much. I just want to say we're on vacation here in Florida, and I told people about what Michael is doing, you know, my wonderful son is doing. And I said the same thing. I told them about what happened in the United States, and I said to them, I don't want to minimize what happened.
Right.
I said, my parents who lost everything, my father lost his whole family. And I said, I don't know how they even started over, you know, and you guys, unbelievable, you know, like I said also the same thing, you know, not that I minimize 3,000 people, my parents lost hundreds of relatives, you know, and they were able to start over. So, you know, it's unbelievable that you mentioned that I mentioned the same thing yesterday to a couple here.
Yeah.
Thank you. I just want to thank you for the most wonderful presentation. Thank you very much.
Thank
Most
you.
wonderful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you guys for sharing. Yeah, as a grandchild of Holocaust survivors, I'm not sure if you heard me before, I said thank you. So just want to say that again. Thank you, Mom and Dad, for sharing that. But kind of
Michael,
with this understanding.
Michael, I think it's also worthy to note that those organizational meetings of the Nazis in America, they were smashed up real good by the mafia and the Jewish groups that were with the mafia.
Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, I think you're referring to, are you talking about the Madison Square Garden?
Right.
Yeah. And then Henry took us to the present, right? This Jews Will Not Replace Us hate march. Right. And if anyone has heard about it, that there were these in the United States, in New York, this National Day of Hate was supposedly for yesterday. So it had all Jews and people on alarm all day, which was very frightening. So, I mean, this is happening every day. I see Michael, you have your virtual hand raised. Please, if you can.
Oh yeah, thank you very much. My name is Michael Polar. I want to thank our speaker and the Holocaust Museum and Tolerance Center. Thank you so much, Henry Schachter. My question is about the man Ariel Simonson you mentioned, yes. who was the boy in that photo. Yeah. I know Samuel Box, he's a painter. He has done about, I don't know, lots of different versions of that, painting that photo, and it's iconic at this point. I just want to know how to spell his name to see, you know, kind of more, if he has any work that he's done himself.
Simonson with an I, S-I, I think it's double N,
Okay.
O-N-S-O-N, Simonson, as well as I know. He wrote a book about his experiences as well, how he was smuggled out of Warsaw Ghetto. He lived with some relative who was passed himself off as a landed gentry Polish, but he was Jewish. But he passed, and he stayed with him until the Russians came, and he went back into Warsaw with the Russian forces. Yeah, it was unbelievable. He went to Israel on Youth Aliyah, and he actually fought in two Israel's wars, 56 and 73. He was working for El Al, and he met the love of his life on and he settled down in a little tiny village in Eckveld, if you know what Eckveld is, in a little village in Dorset. And I couldn't believe it when I met him, and it was a wonderful experience. I took him to a couple of schools with me to talk as well. Yeah, amazing experience. So
did he give testimony?
Yes, he used to, but then he when he retired, more or less, he said he'd had enough of it, and he just wanted to live a quiet life in the countryside with his wife. And yeah, I mean, I pulled him back in a way, because I found him, as it were. So it was good. Unfortunately, he passed away a few years ago. But what an experience! I mean, he had to hide in the bilge of not a carrot, what the boats, you know, what are they called? In the bilge of a boat with 3 apples. That's all he had for about a week till the boat left, and he managed to get off. Yeah, it's quite a story to tell. Yeah.
Well, thank you. And you know, I'll look for.
I think it's Simonson. Simonson. Hope you can find
him.
And
I was also curious where you got your maps. The maps are really helpful. I teach. I'm a second generation, and I teach, and I like good maps. So, is there a text that you used for the maps, or
maps? Yeah. No, just I don't know. I just looked up a few maps and found them on Google Maps or something. I can't remember actually. You have to search through a few and then find the ones you want. Where were your people based?
My father was, and his parents were in Budapest, Hungary, and they were sent in 1944 to Bergen-Belsen. Yeah, and they were released, exchanged, so they were on the Kastner transport, which I'm just learning more about.
Right, but they were very lucky in that case. Very lucky. I know a few people who were sent to Auschwitz who survived from Hungary, because they were the last ones, and they were still fit-ish. You know, those that weren't sent straight to the gas chambers could at least survive for a while, because it's only a couple of months before they were released. Yeah, that was the story and a half as well with the Hungarians. Yeah, I know. And it still is, unfortunately, in Hungary.
I'm sure I speak for everybody when I say we're sorry for your loss, or your many losses as well.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Michael, for your contributions. And my grandmother was actually one of the Hungarian Jews at the time. She considers herself Romanian, but who in 1944 was taken to Auschwitz. Thank God her siblings survived, but lost her family immediately.
The amazing thing is that Adolf Eichmann could find the transports to take hundreds of thousands of Jews to Auschwitz, and yet at the same time there were no transports to provide ammunition or replacements the Russian front, for the German soldiers. You know, they were desperate for ammunition, but there was no transport available. They fought the war just like they fought against the Jews, just like they fought the war against the Russians. It's exactly the same, with the same fervor and the same determination. This is difficult to imagine. It's difficult to, you know, the extent of the brainwashing, that they should be so radical to get rid of all the Jews. That this was their purpose in life. Yeah.
Henry, you mentioned your father and the family's business. What did your father do?
He was in the fashion business. He manufactured ladies' coats. Actually, there's quite an interesting story about that, because my uncle Benny, the youngest of the two boys that you saw, he had a very good friend, a non-Jewish friend called Abel, and they did everything together. They did fishing and playing football. They did everything together. This Abel spent more time in our flat than his own home. And one day he disappeared. And 6 months later, suddenly there was a knock on the door, and there was Abel in full Nazi uniform with the hat and the cross belts and everything. Wo ist Benno? Where's Benny? And my aunt, who opened the door, said, well, why? What's the matter, Abel? Why you want him? So he's got to come down to headquarters. She said, well, he's not here. I said, right, well, I'm coming back tomorrow with my friends, and we will search the flat. Within 15 minutes, Benny's bag was packed, and he was off to Berlin to my mother and father. And he stayed there till he got his visa to come to England. When he did come to England, having learned a little bit about the coat business from my father, to cut a long story short, he became eventually one of the largest manufacturers in England of ladies' coats and suits. And he owed it really to the time he spent with my father in Berlin. It's amazing, amazing story. And my other uncle, the Adolf, poor soul, he was older, so he was about 19 when the war broke out. And he was considered by the British to be an enemy alien. They were very frightened that, amongst all these Jews, there must be some spies. So off he went, although he was religious and all the rest. They packed him off to Canada to chop trees down in the forest. And all the Jews were in one hut. He tells the story how they were all in one hut. And next to them were all the Luftwaffe pilots and navigators and all that. And the other hut right next to them. You can imagine what was going on until they realized that there weren't actually spies. So he spent the rest of the war in Montreal or wherever with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He became very, very much a Lubavitcher, because they actually were the only ones who used to look after these refugees. He tells a story how that one day a van turned up at the camp just before Passover, with a load of food, beautiful food for the whole Yontif. Suddenly, everybody in that camp, in that barrack, became religious Jews. They all became religious when they saw what the Lubavitcher brought. Yeah.
And was your father in Belgium when you were born? Your mother was alone at that time?
No, he came back. No, I was born in March 1939. So he had come back from Poland not shortly after the Kristallnacht to finalize things for his business, because he knew he had to go. And in fact, in the museum in Berlin, I was amazed when I saw it. There's a document, framed document on the wall that my father had written to the Inland Revenue, the German Inland Revenue, asking them, please don't take too much taxation from me because I'm already losing so much money. I mean, businesses were sold for for a tenth of their value. The Germans knew that they had them by the, that they could just offer anything. And yet you still had to pay on what the balance was before you could take any money out at all. And it was there in his handwriting. I couldn't believe it. Amazing. Not that it did him much good. I'm sure he didn't have much help from the Inland Revenue at that time, from the German government.
How old were your parents when they were married and when you were born?
I was born in March 1939, and my mother would have been 28, and my father was about 5 years older. Yeah, 33, something like that.
Trying to imagine these journeys at her age, on her own.
Well, that was amazing. That was amazing. I mean, with false papers. You had to have an exit visa as well as you had to have documents coming out your ears. The Germans love documents in triplicate and quadruple if possible. And every now and again, somebody was taken off the train, who didn't have the right documents. And then they'd come round yet again, another lot, asking for the documents. How she did it, I don't know. More particularly, how she got from the last train station to the Ardennes forest, I just don't know. I don't know what happened. Somebody hopefully accompanied her or something. Otherwise, I don't know how she would have made it cross country to go into a forest. I don't know. Pity I never found out. I could have, I think, found out because her sister, who she, the one in Belgium, probably knew nearly everything, but they were reluctant to speak about things, They didn't want to relive that awful time. I mean, 4 years in hiding. My cousin Marcel was 13 when he went into there, and he came out at 17. And when he did, his hair had gone completely white, and it stayed white for the rest of his life. Because how do you live inside 4 walls for 4 years? I mean, talk about Anne Frank. I mean, this was repeated several times all over the place. Yeah.
What role did religion play in your life as a hidden child in a Christian family, and what role did it play?
Interesting. Yeah, well, I was very, very religious when I came over to England. I knew all my Hail Marys and everything, and I used to sing Heilige Nacht in French, and French was my only language. I used to sing very beautifully, actually, and it brought tears to my grandfather listening to me. Holy night, and oh, holy night, I'm sure he got a lot of nachas from it. Anyway, eventually I realized that, I don't know when the change took place, actually. When I began to understand English or Yiddish, and I was able to communicate a bit with my grandfather and my aunts and uncles, because up until then, there was nobody that I could speak to. It took me till I was about 7 before I spoke enough to understand somebody. Took me about 3 months. But, and then I promptly forgot my French. Having learned English, Yiddish, and a bit of Hebrew.
Have you spoken about going to the schools in Germany?
No, haven't mentioned that at all. My daughter Hope's here. She just said, have I mentioned anything about going to the schools in Germany? Last year we did. We decided to, well, we were invited by a pastor, a lady pastor over there. She'd seen me in Wannsee at the Wannsee conference. And she said, would you come to the Rhineland and speak to the children? So I said, well, yeah, before I knew what I was doing, I said yes. And then came COVID, so I couldn't do it for two and a half years. But then we went and I spoke to 8 schools, 2 church groups, and 1 old age home. The funny thing was, actually, in the old age home, the one lady said to me, you know, I was in Hamburg and I was 5 years old. It wasn't such a pleasant thing either, being bombed by the British. And so I said, yeah, well, we both got something to be thankful for the Nazis. She had to put that in, that it wasn't so pleasant for her either. Yeah, never mind.
Well, I think something that I got from the...
Come here.
I think something that I got from the, to get the other stool,
Right.
from the visits to Germany was a sense of how much the German people were the first real victims of Hitler, because they had no choice. You know, the children were all brainwashed, as we talked about before. Nobody was allowed to disagree, or, you know, so, and, you know, thousands of their own people were murdered. You know, the gassing techniques were perfected on their own people, you know, on the disabled children, on the gay community. And as for those boys in the Hitler Youth, like my father said earlier, millions of them ended up being slaughtered, mostly on the Russian front. So I did feel that very strongly when I was visiting Germany, that they were themselves victims as well.
I want to maybe hope while we have you here, I'll give your father a moment of break, then I'll let you ask more questions. But, you know, as a 2G, what has your experience been like with hearing your father's testimony, learning about your family? And it sounds like you're here today with your father and you went to Germany. What has that experience been like for you?
I think it's been it's been very good, actually, because it was something that we didn't really talk about. You know, when we were children, it was all a bit of a mystery, what had happened to our grandparents. Obviously, we didn't grow up with grandparents, and being living in England in a mostly Christian society, all the other children at school would go and see their grandparents in the holidays, and would always have stories about visiting grandparents, doing things with their grandparents. And we just simply didn't have them. And there was this sort of darkness about it, you know, that it was almost something to be ashamed of, you know, at that time. And so my earliest understanding of being Jewish was that it was a bad thing, you know. But it has been very rewarding to visit the schools. The reactions from the students are incredible, and the teachers, you know, they're often in tears, and they're so grateful. They couldn't be more appreciative, really. In the main, they take it very seriously, and they are indeed very, very appreciative. But it's only been in the more recent years since we have visited Germany. We went to Berlin twice. And we met people that were working for that museum, the Jewish Museum, not all Jewish people, non-Jewish people as well, who take the time to research as many details as they can about all of the families, about all of the victims. And they were the ones that provided a lot of information to us that we didn't know. You know, a lot of the documentation, my father's birth certificate, his parents' marriage certificate. We didn't have those documents, though. Those were sourced by university students and volunteers working in association with the museum. And like my father's probably told you, a lot of young German people are wanting to know how their families were involved in the war. And it's certainly not something that's sort of brushed under the carpet over there. Did my father tell you he's recently become a German citizen?
No, he did not.
Yeah, he applied for German citizenship, and we went up to the German embassy in London in January, and he was presented with his naturalization certificate by the deputy ambassador. And at that precise moment that he was given the piece of paper, he became a German citizen after 80 plus years. Although his main motivation for that was so that myself and my sister can also apply for German citizenship, so that we can become part of the EU again. Because obviously, well, we were not Brexiteers. We voted to remain. So this is an opportunity for us to be able to work and remain within the EU. And in fact, they are in Germany and other countries in Europe are inviting descendants of any victims or anybody who had to flee under persecution. They're inviting people to become citizens. It's even happening in Spain and Portugal to descendants of the people that were expelled by the Crusaders, by the Spanish Inquisition. So people I know of Spanish and Portuguese descent are doing that, are becoming Portuguese or Spanish citizens based on those grounds. So that's quite interesting.
And that sounds like quite a mixed bag for your father to then become a German citizen again in that sense.
Yeah, it was quite emotional. But the German people that we met were so welcoming, I have to say. It was very moving, and I think that's been therapeutic for us as well. But I think, growing up, my sister and I, we felt the trauma. They call it generational trauma. And I think that's something that's very real, Yeah,
I believe the intergenerational trauma field essentially came about through this understanding of Holocaust survivors, Jewish survivors, and how that was impacted their family and their children's upbringing, et cetera. So it's pretty amazing how this became its own field in its own right. And you answered a question that was asked about how were these documents obtained. So I appreciate that. I mean, the one that was so striking is of your father's parents' wedding marriage certificate with the Nazi emblem. It's unbelievable to see that.
Yeah.
And so visiting Germany for the first time after, was it 79 years? And then has your father visited any other places from his youth, including the one you took that picture in Belgium when you were 11 years old? Have you had a chance to go back to that home?
We haven't, but that is something that I would like to do. I would like to visit Brussels, visit the address where he was in hiding. And I'd also like to visit the last address where my grandparents lived. Yeah, I would like to try and make contact with the family, the Dufay family, although that will be difficult because it's such a common name. But it's something that I feel strongly I would like to approach their family, to recognize them, how brave that couple were, because they were putting their own lives at risk in doing that. So that's something that I would like to do. On the first occasion, well, we've been to Berlin about two times now, but the first time we went with a whole brigade of cousins from Israel. They were very cold because it was October time. They'd never known anything like it. And we laid the, what are they called? Stoppelstein at the address where my grandfather had last lived. So we laid the stones, 5 for the great-grandparents and the 2 younger sisters. And his father, yeah. But we saw quite a few of them in Bonn as well. I don't know if you've heard about these. They're all over Europe. Yeah, my father would like to go to the Rhineland, to Bavaria soon, to speak there, which is in southern Germany. where is it Nuremberg is in that area?
Yes.
Nuremberg and Munich, because it's near Flossenburg camp, where my grandfather died. I don't know whether I personally feel strong enough to visit the camp, because I feel like I have enough, I'm already quite scarred. And seeing the camp itself, the same as I haven't been to Auschwitz. I've been invited to go, but I feel nervous about going, because I mean, it's very good that a lot of British students are visiting Auschwitz. And I think that's all well and good. But for me personally, I think it might just be too much. Have you visited any of the camps?
I did, and the one my grandmother was in Auschwitz, and I went there, and it was a very intense experience. I mean, it was a beautiful summer day, and that made it so strange being there with peace and quiet around me, and imagining my grandmother and her family's, most of her family's last footsteps there,
really?
Where they descended, and it was just. It was an incredibly moving experience for me. It was painful. But yeah, I mean, more than, and someone spoke about this recently, Anna Sultan Eisen just spoke on 2Gs, and in her book, she wrote a book, and she said that she didn't want to just know about where her family died, but how they lived. And it reminded me that, I was so focused on visiting Auschwitz. Now I'm trying to uncover where my family lived.
Yes, exactly.
Learning about that, and I think that is such an important juxtaposition, but really like how we own who we are. Just going back to Henry's life, how you then go into hiding, and essentially you become Henry, not Ariel. And how do we incorporate our family's history back into who we are, and to what extent, and living that, and so that's been a journey that I've been taking for a little while now. More and
where were your family from?
So my mother's family actually is from Poland. Our known family left in the early 1900s, but we found out recently through ancestry research and contacting family members that she did have family who perished in the Holocaust, and one is actually from Radom. So in Poland. My father's family, my grandmother is from Satmar. And my grandfather, my father's father, is from Siget. So these are places that are now in Romania, but my grandmother was taken with the Hungarian Jews in 1944. My grandfather at the time was actually taken east. He was in Chernowitz at the time, so he was away from his immediate family, and went to labor camps, which he had a pretty challenging time, and then finding out after the war that his family, he found out after that his parents and his two siblings were murdered. So yeah, pretty painful.
This would have been the case for most of the survivors.
That's my father, Eddie.
I just wanted to interject something. Listening to Henry's daughter, I've never been in Germany. I was never able to go back there. I remember as a young child, my mother force-fed me every day. My father never spoke about it, but I went to Israel when I was 21 years old, and I said to my friend, we have to stop in Zurich. And when we got to Zurich, the way they spoke, I said to my friend, we cannot stay here. I just could not listen to that, the way they were speaking, the way your father was mimicking the woman that was speaking in the heavy German accent, And I felt the same way, and I still I can't go back. I can't go there. I cannot put my foot in there. Maybe one day I will be able to,
Well, even my mother was quite perturbed about my father becoming a German citizen, because she was in Britain as a little girl in London, getting bombed on, by the Germans, and even she was like, I don't know how you could want to become a German citizen, but like we said, it's more to facilitate us being able to move around Europe rather than wanting to be part of German society. But strangely, now when I hear the German language, it doesn't sound as haunting and chilling as we might, the older generation would think of it. Yeah, I think you'd be sort of surprised really at what the society is like in the main in Germany, which is quite different to the British, because the Britain was never actually conquered or occupied. There's a less understanding about the Holocaust in general in this country than I'd say in the rest of Europe, because the rest of Europe, being occupied by the Germans and having their Jewish populations removed in front of their eyes, they have much more understanding than over here, I think, has that sort of island mentality,
And
so I would rather be in Israel than in Germany, I have to say. I would rather, I would like to spend proper time and live in Israel at some point. We've got hundreds of cousins there, that are all descended from these 4 brothers and sisters that went over in 1933. And what happened to them, that's whole nother story, as you can imagine.
And has your father seen the Christian family that he was with ever after that, and were they ever shared as righteous among the nations?
They haven't been yet, but that's something that I would like to do. I would certainly like to include them.
There's a lot of documentation.
Apparently there's a lot of documentation that we need to source in order to do that. But unfortunately, my father didn't stay in contact with them for a long period of time. He said he last saw them when he was 11, which I think is a bit of a shame. The eldest aunt that brought him up in England was quite embittered, and she discouraged it. She discouraged the contact. I think she was worried he would want to go back.
Well, I heard a similar story in that sense of discouraging this, severing ties, which is such a shame. And looking back, I mean, it could have been also for, as you said, like protective reasons, but what that does, unfortunately, in a sense, severs those ties. So I have another question for your father. He mentions, and because of speaking with your father, I bought the book in a different edition, Breathe Deeply, My Son. You mentioned your cousin, I believe your second cousin, wrote this book. So I was wondering if you could tell a little bit about, and I know everyone's been patient, and thank you for your time. So I just want to say that if you could mention maybe something about Henry and his book, it's an incredible read, starting in and just appreciated a lot of what he says.
Well, the picture on the front, which says, breathe deeply, my son. Yeah, that for starters. This was on an occasion when his father and him were what they thought were going to be gassed. They were walking towards the gas chambers, and his knees started to wobble, and his father held him up and said to him, breathe deeply, my son, because obviously, there's no point in trying to delay the inevitable. But fortunately, they didn't get into the gas chamber. The other thing was that the photograph, the picture that he drew from memory, was when the guards had, in his last concentration camp, the guards had already left, and he was just about able to walk around. Anybody who could still walk, the first thing they were doing is looking for food. That's what they were trying to do. And he drew a picture of himself there. He saw a hut that he didn't know, so he went to the hut, and as he went towards it, he saw a skeleton walking towards him from inside, absolute skeleton, and it was only when he got very close up that he realized it was looking at himself. yeah, that came as quite a shock to him, that he was in such a state. Also in 1986, the German government gave him a medal for having tried to kill Hitler. Now, can you imagine? He's in concentration camps, slave labor camp. Right. They heard that Hitler's train was going to visit the Eastern Front, and it passed right nearby the camp. And he managed to get out of the camp and walked up the track, up the line, and tried and put boulders and twigs and logs or whatever he could find, he put it onto the tracks in the hope that the train would overturn with Hitler in it. And then he went back into the camp. So I said, but Heinz, I asked him, I said, you were out of the camp already, you know, why did you go back? He said, to tell you the truth, Henry, I felt safer in the camp than if I had been out in the fields, because there was a reward for Jews, and the likelihood would be certainly 95% that I would have been handed in. So can you imagine? Yeah. I'm sorry to say, the government of Poland have instituted a law that if you dare to mention any collaboration or anything, you get fined or even get put in prison. But they've got a lot to answer for. It's an unfortunate case.
Henry, I just have two more questions and we'll wrap up. But I just want to say,
okay.
Speaking of being in England, in April, we're going to have the author of Seeking Shelter,
oh, yes.
A memoir of a Jewish girlhood in wartime Britain.
Oh, yeah. Now, when is that?
That's in April. So we'll have that. I believe it's going to be, April 16th, which is Sunday.
Okay.
That'll be during our Sundays with Survivors.
Okay. What sort of time?
That same time, 11.
Oh, right. Okay.
Cynthia does not consider herself a survivor, as she was in England, but she tells the story of her family and in Poland, and also her life as a young person. So it's I think
yes.
it'll resonate with some of the things that were mentioned. But two more questions. So the first one that I wanted to ask you was, what was the experience of, because you were very young, learning, and when and how did you learn of your parents passing?
Oh, not for quite a while. Well, I knew that they weren't there because I was taken to a train station by an aunt who I barely knew, to be put on a train with a British Jewish soldier who took me across the channel. It was a horrible journey, to a completely different family. I found myself in Stamford Hill sitting next to my grandfather, who had a little white beard, and saw all these adults staring at me, and some were in tears. And I was just sitting there bemused. Where the hell am I? What am I doing? Why shouldn't, I just didn't know what was going on, really. Yeah, I was more concerned about Riri, my little toy dog that I'd lost en route from Dover to Calais, or Calais to Dover, or whatever it was. Anyway, yeah, it was a very strange experience, but I knew I was different. I mean, lots of people haven't got parents. There are unfortunately, a lot of orphans. The people get killed in all sorts of ways and haven't got parents. But I was very much aware that I was different in some way, particularly mixing with children. I found it very, very hard. I didn't know what to say. When going to a party was terrible. I was terrified. I stood there, everybody else is laughing and giggling and jumping around and enjoying themselves, and I didn't know how to enjoy myself. I just stood there wondering what to do, because I never had that early acclimatization that children have to social interaction until very late. And that stayed with me for many, many years, a sort of shyness in coming forward. I always stood back. I was always at the back of the room wondering what I should say because never had that experience. As far as learning about my parents, I learned fairly early because we used to go to Belgium on holidays in festivals. There's a place called Knokke-le-Zoet on the coast, which had 3 Jewish hotels in the late 60s and the 60s, yeah. And we used to go there mostly on Tovim. And that's where I met a lot of people who started to tell me about, I was with your mother, and, you know, and I was with your father. And, wow. So then I knew, but that was it. I mean, we didn't dwell on it. I didn't buy anything German for many, many years. No car, no Bosch equipment or anything like that. I did later, but no, as far as becoming a German citizen, this is very interesting. I asked the local community on one occasion, I said, how many people here, if they in my position, hands up, who would become a German citizen and who wouldn't? And it was about 50-50. One lot said, never again, no way, Jose. And the other lot said, it's a mitzvah to become a German, just to show them they didn't get rid of us, he didn't get his way, we're here again.
You should tell him what your grandfather did with the passports.
Oh yeah, well that was the Polish passports. Yeah. Well, when my grandfather came to England, he before the war started, he got everybody's Polish passports, and he stuck them in the oven in the kitchen. They had an oven that stood in the middle of the kitchen. He put all the passports in, the Polish passports, and my aunt was saying, Papa, what are you doing? These are the only documents we've got. What are you doing? He said, never again do I want to step into Poland or have anything to do with them or everything. He was more that way inclined than with the Germans, because it wasn't all the Germans. I mean, my aunt told me it took 15 years for Hitler to get enough Germans to vote for the Nazi party. And even then, as I tell the kids at school, it was only 34% of the people who actually were able to vote, who voted for the Nazis. So, you know, that was a considerable proportion did not vote for the Nazi party, quite the opposite. But they were the largest group, so they formed the government.
So anti-Semitism was far more rife in the East.
Oh yeah, far more in Russia, and it was endemic, absolutely endemic. You know, when the last trial for the killing children for the blood libel was in Ukraine, in Kiev, in 1913, when a Jew was put to trial for killing a Christian child to have the blood for the matzahs. 1930, it took 2 years for him to get off before he was able to prove that it wasn't him. He went to America, actually, afterwards. He had 5 children himself. I mean, you know, the East, it was endemic. Well, you know, because of all the people that left and went to America in those days. In those days, America said, bring me your poor, bring me your this, that, the other, you know, you're oppressed and whatever, open-armed, come. It was a very different situation in 1939.
The difficulty of getting to Palestine as well.
Well, yes, that was also something the British did. They put a quota, 15,000 a year were allowed into Palestine. They did try to make up for it by allowing 10,000 unaccompanied children under 14 to come to England before in 38, 39, mostly from Czechoslovakia or Austria, 10,000. So they tried to make it up that way, which is fair enough. It was a very good thing that they did. I knew, unfortunately, 2 of the Kindertransporter, they died recently. But a lot of these children that came over were subsequently wonderful citizens. They became professors and scientists, and the contribution they made to British life was enormous. You know, there you go. And my uncle became a big coat manufacturer. In fact, he went to America, to New York. I remember actually He went on the Queen Elizabeth, I think it was, or the Queen Mary. No, it was the Queen Mary. Went to New York because their intention had always been to go to America, first get to England and then go to America. So around about 1950, when he'd already started making some money, he went to New York. And when he came back, he said, "Oy vey, forget it. Nechtige tug. Let's stay here where we know what we're doing. The thing, it's a benched country. Forget about America." He must have seen what was going on there. You know, you had to pay everybody to move a rail of coats, garments from one place to another. You'd have to pay somebody, you know, like protection money. You know, he took one look at what was going on there and said, "No way, we stay in England." Sorry about that, people in New York or America. It's a tough life out there. He didn't fancy it too much. It was better to be a citizen of the Queen.
You also answered my other question about going to England and what that was like as a child. And so I have one final question.
Right.
But first I want to just thank you, Henry, and thank you for bringing some of your hope. It's bringing hope with you.
Yes.
It's beautiful to see you both, Henry and Hope, and for both of you to be a part of this. It's so meaningful. And for everyone here and sharing, it's been incredible. So
Henry, thank you very much. Thanks everybody for coming and having the patience.
And I just want to ask you one last question then before we go, so you can have the final word. Is what would you leave us with? Some because you are very funny, you know, and I enjoy that about you. And how do you have this humor? It's probably also like growing up in England, you guys have great humor, but you know, talking about hope and humor, how do you come out of all of this with such an outlook and continuing on, etc.? How do you do that?
It's a difficult one to answer, but I think it's a general trait of the Jewish people. Or for any people who are in desperate situations, the way to make light of it, to joke about it, to make it seem not quite so bad. One can't just put one's head down, oy vey, all the time. You've got to have some light relief. And that's what I do in these talks. I mean, occasionally I talk about how I didn't want to leave Belgium because I'd found a girlfriend by then. And I'd asked her to marry me and all this. And I asked the children, "Do you want to know if I kept my word?" And they all say, "Yeah." And then I say, "Nah." Yeah. It's just to bring a little bit of light relief. You can't go through life bashing your chest the whole time. At least not in my view. I don't do it deliberately for any reason. It's just the way, I suppose, the way I am. I don't know. But I think most Jews actually, you know, they see the funny side of themselves. I mean, you've got enough comedians. I used to love some of the American comedians. They're hilarious. Yeah, so.
Alan somebody?
Oh yeah, Alan Sherman. Do you remember him? You heard of him, Alan Sherman? He sings songs. He's got records. Fantastic American humorist. Fantastic. So there we go. Anyway, thank you all very, very much indeed. You're waving. I can see you waving. Thank you. God bless. And Abi Gesinnt. And let's hope that, you know, next year in Jerusalem. All the best. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well.